Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you wherever you are in the world. My name is Trisha P. Octaviano, and I'm from the Asia Europe Foundation. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This is the first webinar of the ASEF Public Diplomacy Training. This project is supported by the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. So to learn more about what we do as an organization, please visit our website. It's www.asef.org. So to make everyone have a good experience in this webinar, there are some house rules that I'd like to share with you. So first is that we encourage you to give your comments and ask questions to our panelists. Second, please clearly state if you want us to read your comments. Your questions will be read aloud and we will mention your names. However, you can also let us know if you're posting an anonymous question. Third, write your comments in the chat box. You can see that icon below your screen. It's in the webinar controls. Here you go. So you can just comment at any time. My colleague Martin Vidanes will collect your comments and he will also collate your questions and I will relay them to our panelists. For your questions, you can also write them in the Q&A box. You can click the Q&A in the webinar controls as shown earlier. You can opt to post a question as an anonymous attendee. Fifth, you can upvote a question in the Q&A if you feel like you share the same question or comment. It's just that for that question, you can only upvote, but you cannot write your comment. Again, you go back to the chat box to give your comments or any suggestion related to the topic. Six, we also encourage you to interact with other participants. Seventh, as this webinar is chat-based, your microphones are automatically muted and videos are turned off. Let's begin. More than a fifth of the global population has been under some form of a lockdown, which has turned a good percentage of the global working population into remote workers. With this transition to remote working, virtual meetings have become indispensable. Working from home is driving the increased demand for online collaboration tools such as Zoom, Slack, and Microsoft Teams. And I'm sure that you're using one of those tools because they're considered as the top 3 teleconferencing apps recently. The increased usage of teleconferencing tools has raised the alarm on privacy and security of users. Zoom bombing entered our vocabulary with the rise of trolls exploiting Zoom's privacy settings. But Zoom bombing is just one example of the various security challenges facing us in this new normal. We're not here to criticize Zoom. It's a good platform. You just have to familiarize yourself with its security features. There are a number of risks involved in insecure teleconferencing. How to minimize this risk and protect yourself, your colleagues, and your meetings are what we are going to discuss in this webinar. As we continue our good habits to help mitigate the spread of coronavirus even while working in our personal space, we must also observe good cyber hygiene to keep us safe in cyberspace. As you can see, this one is the recent statistics from Microsoft. And Microsoft has seen an exponential increase in the usage of its app, Microsoft Teams. They set a new daily record of 2.7 billion meeting minutes in one day. That's 200% increase from 900 million on March 16. And as I talked about earlier, here are the top meeting applications downloaded. And while it's no surprise that Zoom is on top of the list, Zoom recorded close to 131 million installs across the globe. That's a whopping 60% increase compared to the same period last year. Let me now introduce our experts. We are privileged to have Mr. Vladimir RADUNOVIĆ, Cybersecurity and E-Diplomacy Programs Director at Diplo Foundation, and Mr. Ray Green, Senior Cybersecurity Consultant at Sony Electronics Singapore. So now let's move on. Let's familiarize ourselves with the term cybersecurity, Zoom bombing, cyber hygiene. Ray, let us know what we should be knowing about all these terms, because for many of us here in this meeting room, it's something that we're not exactly familiar with. So please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much, Trish, for the introduction. And to give it a little bit of context, yeah, it's a very interesting topic for us to discuss and know about cybersecurity. And as you mentioned, I've been working with IT for more than 15 years. And I started my career as a network and telecoms engineer. So what I do is I do network cablings and telecommunications, PABX, and then now I move with Sony, and I was hired to help out with Sony's infrastructure, cybersecurity, compliance, governance by providing security counsel, policies, and security management. In summary, I was hired to help out Sony to protect their cybersecurity space and building virtual perimeter protections, both external and internal. The reason I'm giving a context of what I'm doing right now is to give you a journey of where did I come up on my following slides that I'm going to share you. So I prepared some slides here to quickly answer your question, Trish. So if you allow me to just quickly share my screen. Okay, I'm just going to share you a couple of slides here. Number one would be, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, your question, and we're going to talk about cyber virtual meetings as well, and also the importance of cybersecurity awareness. I'm going to teach you about data classification, some basics of data classification, and how should we apply it within our virtual meetings or virtual conference such as this one. And I'm going to talk about some tools to help you classify your data, or in this case, our presentation material, like what I'm presenting right now. So I'm just going to teach you some basics. I know maybe most of you had already came of these words, but I'm just giving you a refresher for you to understand the terminologies that we're going to use here. So what is cybersecurity? But before we answer that, let us define the prefix. So cybersecurity is just a combination of two words. Number one is cyber, number two is security. It's very self-explanatory there. But let me focus with the term cyber. Okay, so there's a lot of cyber that we could hear out in the outside world. We could hear cyber forensics, we could hear cyber crime or cyber bullying. But basically, we're just going to focus with the term cyber here. Cyber is just an adjective relating to or characteristic of the culture of computers, information technology, and virtual reality. And let me put it simply by saying cyber is a prefix used to describe things that are made possible by the spread. Remember this? I want you to remember, number one, computing devices. And number two, anything related or connected to the internet also falls under the word category, the word cyber category rather. Okay, so computing devices and related to, or anything related or connected to the internet. Now, what can be considered as a computing device? Of course, we all know and familiar with the usual components or IT equipments that we could see around our office, and in this case, in our own house, because since the corona pandemic, we've been working at home, thus making us use more of our security of our video conferencing platforms. So we have computers, we have the laptops, we have the routers, we have the Wi-Fi devices, everything. Okay, those are computer devices. And let me show you this. If you're working from home, if you heard of Internet of Things, and yes, your iPad, even your televisions, your light bulbs, or even your kettle can now be connected to the internet if they are manufactured that way. All right. But what I would like to focus tonight is to show you this guy. Okay, maybe this is you right now. And I don't know if, of course, this guy is working from home using his computer doing teleconferencing. Okay, and there was this I'll say if you've seen this picture that trended in the internet, this would be like the new get up when people go to their Zoom meetings. All right, but setting joke aside, what is a virtual meeting? Okay. So virtual meeting, obviously, this is not virtual meeting. This is an on-premise physical meeting, and we're not having it during this season. Okay. And now we move into this type of meeting, a virtual conferencing meeting. In this case, we're using Zoom. Okay. So virtual meeting is just a substitute or replacement for in-person meetings so that one does not have to travel to the actual location where meeting is being held. Instead, you can attend it from wherever you are with the use of video teleconferencing software transmitted via where? Via the internet. Okay. Remember when you meet on-premise, the physical meeting, the information you send there when you talk is analog, your voice. Okay. For analog meetings, you can rely on your physical securities, like your perimeter fence, your barbed wires, your walls, or your security guard. You know that. Okay. But when you move to virtual meetings, the information you transmit via your beautiful voice becomes digital. So remember the words that I'm using here, analog and then digital. So the moment you step into your Zoom, the data that you transmit becomes digital already. Okay, and when it becomes digital, the meeting itself is already considered as what? As computer data or cyber. Okay, and let me show you the conversion here. So on-premise physical meetings equals analog, while virtual meetings is digital. And digital equals computing devices. What are the computing devices? Could be your phones, your laptops, your tablets, your computers that you're using right now. Okay, and those computing devices has our data information. Thus, computing device is equals to data, and it falls under cyber. I know I'm just mixing, it may look that I'm mixing words here, but I want you to remember that your computing device that can be connected or anything that can be associated to the internet is your data. That is your computing data. And data means cyber. Now, just a quick definition of data. Computer data is information processed or stored by a computer. So anything that you do within your computer, it could be the documents, images, audio clips, software programs, or any other types of data, okay, that can be processed by the computer through the internet are considered computer data. Now, let me fall back to Tri's question. Why cybersecurity awareness is important with our virtual meetings? And yes, this is the preferred way to do our virtual meetings. But one thing that we do not want to happen in our virtual meetings is this. Okay, because you do not want someone to Zoom bomb or call intrusion your meetings, or worse, to have your virtual meeting hacked or tampered and stealing all of your confidential meeting discussions. Okay, so this is not the preferred way to do our virtual meetings. Now, let me just quickly show this to you. This is a real-world example wherein one of the famous news out there that happened in the internet, wherein a government in India hosted a meeting, and this is their invite. Now, what is wrong with this picture? Okay. I'll just give you a couple of seconds to have a glance of what's wrong with this picture.
Oh, just to be clear, Ray, I think this one is in Indonesia, right?
It's in Indonesia, right, Trish? So it's a real government event in Indonesia. Okay, it happened about a month ago, maybe, and they were victimized by this Zoom bombing thing. Okay, and yes, this is the issue right here. They posted the Zoom meeting ID along with the password. So you've done a very good job, Trish, by distributing the password via email on each participants with a slight encryption on the password. So it's a good job. So yeah, yes, this company right here, they encountered a Zoom bombing, not because of a security breach, but just a simple lack of awareness, some practical security awareness that us users needed to perform every time we do our meetings. So what are the lessons learned here? Okay. So I could only tell you is to plan your virtual meeting. Okay. Preempt the meeting topic discussions and ensure presentation materials are labeled. And most importantly, I'll have another 5 minutes here about classifying your data. Second is, of course, to improve personal awareness. Use appropriate online platform suitable to your needs. Okay. And third, ensure meeting security. Use unique meeting ID every time you generate a new meeting. And of course, generate a unique password every time you launch this meeting. And let me focus now with data classifications. Okay. The process of categorizing data assets based on nominal values according to each asset sensitivity, that is data classification. Now, when we talk about data classification, where should we begin or how to begin? Okay, this just falls into these simple steps that I have come up here. Just a simple steps of plan, do, check, and act. Okay, under plan, identify your data assets, identify data custodian. Second is do, deploy classification program, implement enforcement technologies. 3, review and classify your logs, your calls. And now, number 4, before we end the cycles, to reclassify data. Okay, just to make it more simple for you, I would like to teach you about number 1, like commercial and government. Okay, when it comes to data classifications, commercial and government both vary in classifications. Generally, what I've seen in the commercial sector does a pretty good job in specific areas like financial and insurance. Okay, when it comes to government, they do a great job at classifying data. Classifying your data should clearly define the type of data and its confidentiality. Number 3, data classification should be part of a solid life cycle and data management process. Lastly, the classification generally should be defined by the data owner, that is you, okay, because your voice becomes digital, remember, when you join to this meeting call, and your voice and your meeting itself, and the moment you press record, everything becomes data. Okay, so that classification generally should be determined by the data owner, that is you, whoever initiated this call, and or perhaps the stakeholders, or in this case, the viewers, in this case, especially our Zoom meeting. Okay. And again, setting data classification, we should set criteria, determine controls, identify the owner, document expectations. I know there's a lot here. I'm just trying to fast-pace my discussion so we could have enough time with our interactive conversation. We need to have custodian and some transferring location, because your data is being transmitted actually from your premise to the vendor data center and down to your your meeting, to whoever people that you're meeting with. And lastly, declassification. Okay, I have a separate slide for this one. I will show it to you later as we progress. Okay. Classification should clearly define type of data and confidentiality. Okay, we're still in data classification part. Okay, and let me just show you some samples of how you should classify your data. What I'm going to show you is one of the samples from a commercial data classification from highest to lowest. Maybe some of you have seen this. What I'm trying to show here is every time you anticipate your meeting, every time you plan, at least at the back of your mind, you should remember, is the meeting that you're going to attend to, are you talking about sensitive information? Okay, by then, maybe you should limit the number of participants, okay, or maybe don't do the Zoom meeting at all. You could categorize it down to confidential, private, proprietary, and public, okay? And this is one of the, I would say, best example for government data classification from highest to lowest. Okay, when it comes to government sector, and the government has a very strict classification levels. And once again, depending on if you are, let's say, in the military or in the intelligence sector, some of this may not totally correlate. But generally, in the military, this is what you could see. The intelligence agency generally have higher levels in some cases. For specific slide here, Okay, you could see top secret. Top secret data is essentially is the data that is exposed or it could cause severe damage to our national security. Okay, and everything is self-explanatory. And let me just go to the lowest one, unclassified. I don't know if you watch a lot of Hollywood movies, but you could see some data there if they are classified or unclassified. Unclassified is the data that has no classification or is not sensitive. I think in this case right here, in this presentation that we're having, I think this is considered, this is, I think Trish classified this meeting as a public type of data. Okay. And on this slide, I'm just going to show you some use case of a classification structure. Okay, there's a data classification. There's restricted, confidential, internal, and public. Okay, and those are description and example. So if you're going to discuss something in your meeting that may contain, okay, that when you say, when I say meeting, because again, all of the words that yours, or all of the spoken words that you'll be performing on your meeting is already a data. It doesn't have to be a presentation or a PowerPoint or Word. It is your voice itself that was converted from analog to digital, thus becoming a data. You could classify the information, those information that you're about to disclose, whether it's restricted, confidential, internal, or public. Okay. And before I end my slide, let me just show you some tools to classify your data for your virtual meetings and presentations. Okay, you may use products from your cybersecurity vendor that offers classification labeling. Okay, technologies that it can be integrated with the tools or applications that you're using. And what I'm going to show you here are some vendors that offers this type of solution. There's a solution from, let's say, Microsoft Azure, if you're a Microsoft user, that you could integrate to your email, or some Untitled Security. And I think the last slide that I have here is a quick overview of how to use this technology. So what we have here is the computer of the user who's about to present. He's actually connected to Zoom. And it's going to show us that on his slide, on his, in this case, Microsoft Word, he's going to use this data classification tool or data labeling tool, which is called Titus. As you can see, Zoom attendees can see everything, okay, whatever he's typing. And you can see this is a public document. They have classified it as public. And now what it's going to do is going to change the settings or the parameters or the label into restricted. And once he clicks it, you see it blocks the whole file. By having that tool, you can you could preserve, or you could never accidentally show whatever confidential or highly confidential file that you have accidentally to your presentation. Okay. And to wrap it up, 3 things to remember to improve your cyber hygiene in virtual meetings. Again, number 1, plan your virtual meetings. Preempt the meeting topic discussions and ensure presentation materials are labeled. Okay? And again, you become the data. Classify it. Use and join only known reputable video conferencing services. In this case, we're using Zoom, and they have their own security parameters applied here, provided by your organization. Number 2, improve personal awareness. You are your own cybersecurity expert. You don't need us. Know your own teleconferencing software solution. Okay, and you could also self-learn, enroll to online classes like LinkedIn Learning or lynda.com. And lastly, ensure meeting security. Know how to use the security features of your teleconferencing solution, of course, by educating all of your members of your organization, and lock down your meetings. All right. So it's a very interesting topic, and I know I've just scratched barely the surface of about cybersecurity, and I believe Vlada could answer this better than me. So yeah, those are the slides that I've prepared for you, and I would like to receive any questions. If you have any questions, just feel free to type it down to our question chat box. You could ask it to Trish, and I think our moderator will unmute you, and I'll be glad to answer them. Other than that, yeah, back to you, Trish.
Thank you. I think that was a very good overview, especially on the part of data classification, because I think generally people just tend to look at data as they are without even classifying which are confidential, which ones are actually for public consumption. About 80 or 85% of data breaches everywhere in the world are actually caused by human error.
Mhm.
This is because we lack the knowledge of actually protecting the data. And so please, Vlada, tell us, number one is that please again walk us through cybersecurity, because now we've seen the overview, but we want to know more. And we only know a few risks outside. And the most common is, intrusion by uninvited guests. But there are other risks that we should be aware of. Please let us know and just discuss it further so that our audience also will be aware about, where they should be protecting themselves from. Go ahead, Vlada.
Thank you, Trisha, and thanks for the invitation. I think this topic is becoming, for us cybersecurity professionals, it has always been important and necessary, but it's becoming a mainstream now as we move into this so-called, what I like to call the blended life, mix of online and in vivo, and it's becoming crucial. Now, I think it's really important what Ray has outlined. I think possibly every sort of discussion, particularly with people that are not that much in cybersecurity, as probably we have most of the audience here, as you mentioned, needs to start with explaining how the things work. Because that's the only way, once we understand what Ray was explaining, into how our voice or data become digital and then move from one place to another, that we actually connect this digital hygiene we are going to mention afterwards and understand why we need to do it. It's simple to tell people don't click on the link, but people would say, well, why? So you have to explain it. I think this was a really, really important introduction. Now, my background is a little bit of a schizophrenic maybe, but might add a good value to this discussion. I am an engineer as well, a degree in electrical engineering. But then I moved into diplomacy, the master in diplomacy. And my work with Diplo Foundation is, I'm a director of cybersecurity and e-diplomacy programs. We do a lot about training, basically online courses and in-situ courses of mainly governments, but the others, on cybersecurity risks. But we look at the policy aspects, at the more general institutional risks and the negotiations and the political aspects, if you wish. But even with that, you have to go into nitty-gritty of how the internet works and what cybersecurity is. And I'll try to add this second layer to what Ray was mentioning. I'll start with an illustration that I particularly like to share. You should be able to see it now, I hope. It is something that, so you see the crocodiles and the ducks and the branch. If you look at the theory of risk in information risk management, we would usually say that the risk is a combination, a multiplication in a way of vulnerabilities, assets, and threats. So what are those, particularly in cyber world, right? If you look at the vulnerability at the branch, those could be any sort of bugs in a software, in a hardware, and we know that software and hardware around us have a lot of bugs that can be exploited for viruses and whatever. We try to patch them, we try to get the new edition. We also sometimes have antivirus, we should have, all of us, to try to locate the exploitation of vulnerabilities. And in this case, it's actually this small break in the branch. Then what are the ducklings or the chickens here? These are the assets. So what do we want to protect? Usually we say, that the cybersecurity risks are against computers or devices. Is it so? Actually, the main risk is data, and Ray was mentioning that. So we usually, if you ask institutions and companies to evaluate the assets they have in a company, they will count and put the price on every single chair and computer and desk, but they will not put the price on data, which is understandable. A, because usually there is a lack of understanding, and B, it's hard to quantify the value of the data, but at least we should be aware of what are we protecting. And I'm sure we'll come back to that. This is an important issue also in virtual meetings. What is actually that we want to protect? We'll get back to that later. But on a broader scheme, what we want to protect, so it is the computer, certainly the devices, it is the data. But it goes beyond that. It goes into reputation of companies, of people, and so on. It goes even further because Ray was mentioning the connected devices around. We have more and more governments' critical infrastructure connected to the internet. So it's also about critical infrastructure, health sector, name it, banks, whatever. It could at some point even be about lives, because we have seen some cyber attacks that end up with a physical explosion or physical damage. Luckily, we haven't seen any victims thus far, but it could happen. And certainly also democracy. I mean, voting has been is a typical target more and more. Voting systems, voting mechanisms, media, knowledge about politics, and so on. So assets are really becoming broad. And then lastly is the threats. So who are the crocodiles? Who is attacking us? It could be certainly what we call script kiddies, or kids that are playing with scripts and trying to find the vulnerabilities and exploit and so on and show them off. It could be criminals. And there are many, many very sophisticated criminals around the world, cyber criminals. And the problem is that in a typical surrounding, you can have a criminal which is next door to you, but this criminal cannot attack a house somewhere in Brazil. But here, the criminal can be anywhere around the world. So anyone around the world can actually get to you. There is a huge opportunity for criminals in this global aspect of the internet. And then besides, we also have some terrorist groups, we have some political hacking groups, and more we have states. So the states are building serious repository of cyber weapons and capacities to attack each other. And the problem is that when they do that, we are usually the weakest link again. And you mentioned it, Trisha, and it's absolutely right. One of the weakest links, probably one of the biggest breaks in this branch, the biggest vulnerabilities is us, it's humans, because we just don't have either knowledge or time to focus on whether we should click on this link, whether we should open this attachment, whether we should respond to someone, allow someone to plug in the USB in our computer. We just don't care about that. And why don't we care? And I'll close with that. We usually say, but who am I to become a victim? I mean, well, I'm an employee in a ministry or in a company. I don't have much money. Okay, I have to be cautious about my bank account, but are they really going to come after me? Well, the main reasoning for attackers, whoever they are, is that they're not necessarily coming after you. They're coming after who you are connected with. So they're coming after your institution. They're coming after the institutions or organizations that are connected to your institution. So if you're working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's not you who can be hacked. Or even, let's say, your wife or your husband, they don't even have connection, but they can be hacked in order for someone to get into your system, in order for them to be in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and penetrate further. Or if you work for a company who is a supplier to a ministry or to a critical infrastructure, energy sector, you are the one because you are an entry, you're a gateway to the attack. And sometimes we forget that. So that's a critical thing also to think when we think about the security of meetings and ourselves in these meetings, and why the hell would someone, jump in a meeting or try to hack me? Well, that's one of the reasons, right? And to conclude, just have it in mind that the risk is actually a combination of all these three factors: vulnerability, asset, and the threat. If you don't have any of those, if there are no ducklings, there is no risk. If it's not a branch, it's a road, there is no risk. If there are no crocodiles, there is no risk. But if they're all around, the risk multiplies. So we have to be cautious about assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. And I bring it back to you, Trisha, now, and then we'll focus more on the particular aspects of the meetings and so on. Trisha.
Thank you. My key takeaway from that is we have to be vigilant all the time, especially now that many of us are working from home and we're taking much data that is work-related at our personal computer if we're not using organizational laptops, for example. But anyway, before we move on with the third part of our discussion, I have some interesting comments here from our participants. They didn't really exactly experience Zoom bombing, but they say that they have some sort of Zoom bombing experience using other platforms such as Jitsi. But there's this interesting recurring question from our attendees, and it's what is your preferred teleconferencing platform? And I think this is a very good question that will lead us to the third part of our of our discussion, which is what do we really need to look for when we are shopping for teleconferencing apps? So again, Vlada.
That sounds to me like what car should I buy? But what car you should buy, it really depends on a number of parameters. It depends how well you drive, who do you drive, kids, or if you're a younger going out, whether you're going to drink or not, whether you need to I don't know, a huge vehicle to transport something and so on. So in this case, what we are looking at is what do we need? If we need a webinar like this, then there are one type of platforms. If we need I don't know, meetings, then it's another type of platforms, and so on. So the huge question is, what do we need? Now, I can tell you a couple of platforms that we had experience in Diplo, quite some that we played with. We mainly worked with Adobe Connect. And Adobe Connect is a stable platform, quite secure. It is something that was basically built for years. But it is not so intuitive and easy for most as the Zoom became. Zoom became popular because it's easy. You can simply set it up. You don't need much, right? And Adobe is costly as well. Zoom has some options here and there, adding layers. Cisco WebEx is one of those that has been used vastly by big institutions and organizations as well. It's probably one of the most secure platforms as well. I know even some of the global fora and like the Internet Governance Forum that we mentioned has been using Cisco WebEx for years. But there are others. Jitsi is an open source platform. And to be honest, it's the first time I hear someone who has had Zoom bombing in Jitsi. That's interesting. So that's good to know that even open source is not always a clear solution, but you have more options to adjust it to yourself. So if you have capacities to adjust the platform for yourself, then use the open source. If you have more money, probably you'll buy something like Adobe or Cisco. If you're someone in between, you might get to Zoom. And we can certainly get back to security aspects of that later when we touch upon that. But I'll stop there. So it really depends. And I'll share the link in the chat on this Comtech Lab website where we were making sort of a comparison of different platforms, and it can be helpful to some people.
I highly recommend that Contact Lab because it really gives you a good overview of the features of quite a number of apps available for us to use. Before I turn over to Ray, I'll be reading one comment from Tushar Kanti. So this is what he said. So there was a meeting over Jitsi Meet platform, which is like an open platform like Zoom. And the meeting link was shared through public Facebook pages. During meeting, some unknown IDs joined and kicked out all the participants. It was not known that Jitsi Meet was such a software with low admin control. That's a very good story. So definitely you learned from that experience. Ray, I'm just curious, and I think our attendees as well. What makes for an easy target? Because given this example from one of our attendees, it's basically lack of control, or probably we were not just vigilant. That I think made it an easy target for Zoom bombing. Can you match this data classification that you presented earlier with selecting a teleconferencing application?
It's a very good question, and I like the analogy that Vlad used about what car would I use if I go to the market or pick up my kids to their school. There's no specific brand. You could use Bugatti if you got the money. You could use Toyota if you want to. No one's stopping you, or you could actually walk to go there. So there's hundreds of applications out there that you could use, and it all boils down on how you should behave as a user. It all boils down to social engineering. And social engineering is something, for example, it's a very good question that was sent by Tushar Kanti, because probably there's no hacking happened there. Maybe it's the actual admin that was shared over to those users. Okay? So again, it all boils down to you as the user. Is there a social attack or phishing that is happening here? Okay? I should be well informed that, of course, some disruptions happens on our web meeting, but I should always remember that the moment that every time I use my phone, or my computers or my laptop to join a call, I become the asset. Okay, my data, your voice that has been converted from analog to data is already an asset, and protect it. And how should you protect it? You should be ready always. You should accept the risks. If you're going to a public webinar meeting, you don't go there, exposing all of the information about your house or where you live. You don't, right? So it's all up to the user how you classify yourself. Once you go to a meeting, you should know that, hey, I'll be explaining some company secret on how to make our cupcakes. I shouldn't be saying this to the public. I should be saying this only to my boss. Then I should classify the information that I'm about to say as highly sensitive. All right. But if I'm just going to say, I'm going just to perform TikTok, then it's fine. It could be public, right? So it's up to me to decide really to classify the information that I possess and how should I present it to whatever platform I should use. Okay. So it doesn't really matter whether you use Cisco WebEx or Jitsi or Zoom. It's up to us users to really identify and classify the information that we're about to share.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. So in the end, we still have control.
Yes.
Control of something that you really cannot just be lax about it, especially that the kind of data that you're holding. Okay, we have more comments. Let me read them for you. Here's one from Mikel Viteri. Do you believe that everybody must reconsider the term vulnerability after this chat? Chat, I think, referring to different chats online that come with the virtual meetings. I mean, should we change our perception of security when we experience COVID-19, even when we ignore the real danger or the warnings? Vlada, how do you relate that to our current experience with the virus?
Yeah, focusing on cyber, obviously, not on the life security with the time of COVID. And we did a bit of we had one discussion, one interesting discussion, webinar discussion. I'll try to find the summary of that on cybersecurity in times of COVID, basically, and what has changed. And some of the things that have changed are that some components of our society have suddenly become critical, even though we are never thought about it. And one example, which came actually from Singapore, was that the online food delivery became a critical component, or Zoom meetings or meetings in general became a critical component for the economy. E-schools became a critical component. So some things that we never thought would be a critical suddenly became critical, and hospitals, obviously, right? So there was one change. The other one was that certainly, I mean, the criminals and various attackers did misuse COVID-related context. For instance, sending phishing emails. Those are the emails which look absolutely legit, but actually have a infected link or a document, such as an update either from your Ministry of Health or even World Health Organization. So everything is put up to look like that email with more information about health, COVID situation, and so on. But actually, it's fake. And it takes you to the infected website, and you can get infected, and penetration into the whole system and so on. So there were, and then certainly the attacks against hospitals. That's what we have seen in Czech Republic, in the UK, and a couple of other places. But then again, the good, if we can say a good thing, is that because we are moving online, we are all necessarily being more worried about security. And as this webinar shows, we are learning more and more. And there is a sort of a good feeling that not only that the security communities have become more united and trying to combat the threats, but that also we as users simply have to become more aware, and ultimately we might actually end up more safe. Well, hopefully more safe after the COVID, if there is after, but as it goes.
Well, it seems not exactly a difficult task for us, I think, when it comes to setting some sort of a security parameter for protecting our virtual meetings. But we haven't really discussed what parameters we can set at our level for protecting virtual meetings. So Ray, can you just give us maybe your list of things to do, like a checklist
Right.
for us to be protected when we're setting up a virtual meeting, whether we are the host or we are participating as a co-host or
Okay.
maybe.
Well, number one, personally, what I do is I go to my browser and Google the platform that I'm using. It's very practical. If I'm using Zoom, for example, it's my first time to use Zoom, then I'll go search Zoom. Okay? And this is the first time I heard jitsi.org. I'll go for review. I'll go to Google and just Google search jitsi.org about their history and their reputation. And what I always do, okay, if I could just quickly share my screen again, okay, is I go to this part of website here. So this is, for example, this is the website of Zoom. I always go to the bottom portion. It's always at the bottom. Okay. If the website or the platform that I'll be using, okay, I'll be joining to that I'm unfamiliar with, doesn't have any support and any privacy and security section, I'll have second thoughts about it. I'll ask the moderator to maybe recheck or maybe reuse another platform. Now, those reputable platforms out there like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Cisco WebEx, they should have a privacy and security portion here that you could click. And what you could see there, it's already open, is their announcement, their timeline, their report, their roadmaps, and their resources. Okay, I always try to click the best practices before I join. Every time I use their device or their conferencing software, I also study the, let's say, the connection process. From there, I would assume, yeah, I could see the topology or the connection as an IT myself. This one, it's very important to me. Also, when I do some feasibility or some study of the technology that I do introduce to the organization that I work with, I always study the background. So in short, same thing, okay? So what I'm saying is same thing. If you're going to purchase a car, you should search, at least try to search about it, right? You just don't randomly buy whatever, spend thousands of dollars or thousands of whatever currency that you're in without reviewing the product, right? So have a due diligence, have an initiative to research first. It's very easy to research right now. Okay, the internet is in our hands already. We could always Google, we could always search the reputation of the company or the platform that we're using. That's it. It's just a simple 1, 2, 3 step that I do. I hope that answers the question,
Yeah,
Trish.
that's a good one. Um, One of the things that I learned, throughout participating in all this basic cybersecurity webinars is that you always have to familiarize yourself with the application that you're
Mm.
using. Because, for example, with Zoom bombing wouldn't actually happen if you know that there are security features that are available, and you just have to know how to use these features. I have another question for both of you, and this is from Say Hasnet Heng. I think um, our attendee is from Cambodia. So this is the question to both of the speakers. What do you recommend at personal level for the public figures, president, institute director, or people who are working to be ones? For example, like us, who are wanting to be those public figure or in the near future. I think our attendee meant is that what kind of virtual meeting platform should they be using?
It's I could take that before Vlada. Pardon me. It's a absolutely valid and it's a good question. Actually, it falls under top 5 question if I may say. Mainly because if you're a public figure, it says there already. Do it publicly. Don't do an online collaborative meeting. Broadcast it online via YouTube Live or YouTube Facebook. Get a moderator to watch over the chat, right? But other than that, no one could interrupt your broadcast. It's a live one-way broadcast. Okay, people are doing it already. All right, when the presidents or the politicians do their announcement, they broadcast it to all of the platforms via YouTube, Twitter, Facebook Live. Everything is live. So do it one way. Don't do a collaborative meeting for any public announcement or discussion if you're a public figure. So yeah, just do a one-way broadcast. That will be my suggestions for that one, Trish.
Do you have anything to add to that, Vlada, before we move to another question?
That's a very good point to reduce the risk. So you have to again think about the threats, vulnerabilities, right, and how to reduce that risk. And then there is certainly a risk. I guess for public figures there is additional risk or asset, if you wish, is this reputation, because that's something you have to think about. But for all of us that are either looking at becoming something like that or supporting these big people, big public figures. The preparations for their meetings and the team that is choosing the platform for whatever the cause is very important. And Ray mentioned this sort of a public appearance. Besides the public appearance, you would certainly, as a let's say a minister, you would certainly have meetings which are behind the closed doors. That's part of diplomacy, obviously. For these sort of meetings, there is a big question and a lot of global fight, which should be the platform to use. But my comment would, or suggestion would again boil down, it doesn't matter the platform. It's what Ray mentioned. You have to have a team who can carefully go through details of each platform to make sure that that you know what you want to protect. So you want to protect the user data around. You want to protect the conversations, either as they stream or as they are recorded. So the recordings of the conversations, chats, files shared, all of that needs to be protected. And then you also have to protect your own device. That's the key. Because if we protect everything that goes between us now, but I don't protect my device, then it will leak from my device. So that's something that's really important, that all the people involved have some level of protection, but we also have to have trust. I mean, trust in other people's interlocutors. Without that, it doesn't work. And lastly, I think it was the advisor to former State Secretary of the US who said, 21st century is not really a good time for those that are scared of any risks. You have to accept the risks. There are different risks, and we have to start living with different risks while trying to reduce them.
Yeah, I agree. I think we don't really have to be scared, because if we get scared, then at one point we will just stop using and getting familiarized with these virtual meetings now that it's part of the new normal. And just to add to what both of you said, and connect it to the data classification that we shared with us earlier, you can classify your meetings into probably 3 types. Type 1 is if it's a public meeting, then go ahead with Zoom, right? I mean, if it's an event like this, wherein you can just practice basic security measures. Well, if it's type 2, wherein it's confidential, then go for another conferencing app that is more secure, such as WebEx, Cisco WebEx. And if it's confidential, don't share files in such a meeting. You can go for another app which offers an end-to-end encryption. And if it's type 3, which is highly confidential, you have to check the participants that attending your meeting. You really have to exercise all these security parameters, because you don't want any leakage. And we're going to share a very good document from the International Red Cross with all these tips on how to safeguard your data. We will share that in the chat later on. Moving forward, we have a very good question related to policy from Jade Manzano. And this is what he said. Inevitably, there would be proliferation of teleconferencing platforms now. Is there already a universal law that protects data privacy being shown in virtual meetings? I think this is perfect for Vlada because of his familiarity as well with the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. Am I correct? Privacy regulation. Yes, Vlada.
Data protection and privacy, or legal aspects of that, is a huge issue. It's a global issue. And the most we've got thus far was driven by the companies themselves, which put up the privacy policy and what can happen and what cannot happen. But firstly, none of us ever reads these privacy policies because they're 10 pages with ununderstandable language, except for lawyers, and even they got bored with that. So that doesn't work. Secondly, you have to accept everything. Either you accept it or you don't use the service. So there is not really much choice. Thirdly, there were usually no ways to hold the companies accountable for what happens and if there is a data leaks and so on. So probably the biggest advance in that is currently this General Data Protection Directive in Europe, the so-called GDPR, which is interesting because it really enforces penalties to companies with high penalties, range of percentages of their annual turnover, so billions could be, for big companies in case of breaches, in case of not respecting the privacy and so on. And the interesting thing is that that applies to any company who works with any of the European citizens. So equally to Google, Facebook, and so on. Now, obviously, only the European citizens can sue them and actually move it. But this trend forces the big companies, because Europe is a huge market for everyone, that most of the companies are actually, even they are not European, actually trying to adjust their policies and way of work to the GDPR in order not to be, in order that they can actually work with the Europeans. And this is becoming a trend. Now we see the new policy in California, which is to some extent similar to GDPR. So we are seeing that coming. But then the big question will, of course, remain in how do we implement it, and then particularly for people that are in developing countries, whether we can hope for something like that. How do we push our governments to synchronize and harmonize our own laws with these trends and so on? So it is a big battle, but I'm sort of optimistic it's moving in some direction.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like all this data privacy regulation, deserve another webinar topic. Thank you so much, Vlada. We only have 5 minutes left. I'm going to, before I wrap it up, I'll read 2 more questions from our participants. It seems like some of our attendees are already, kind of scared with all the threats now that they know that they exist. So, and the risk. So one question is how to minimize the risk, not just when using Zoom, but I think teleconferencing platforms in general. And another question, is it possible that data breaches or leaks happen in virtual meetings? This is asked by Lindawati Supena. And third, now I'm reading 3 questions. What should I do if I experience intrusion or hacking? I think the third one is very good because it's practical. But try to answer the 3 questions in such a comprehensive manner. I'll begin with you, Ray, before I turn over to Vlada.
Okay, maybe let me start off with the most recent question about what should I do if intrusion or a hacking occurred. The thing is, if there's an intrusion or hacking happening, you will never know. A successful hack is the undetected hack. Okay, you will never know. You will never notice that it's there already. Some hacks, historical hacks, just was identified after a couple of years after it happened already, when the hacker itself broadcasted it by himself to brag online. So you'll never know. So I'm sorry, but I would never advise how should we react. I'd rather advise how should we prevent. Okay, because it's always better to prevent that to cure, right? So just do some self-learning first. It's always go back to we as a person by classifying the topic that we're going to disclose to whatever meeting that we use. We could boil down to a decision to, hey, I'll never use any conferencing having these threats out there so I don't have any risks. No, use those beautiful tools that you have out there, but you should be mindful. Every time you go in, you're already accepting the risks, that there's a possibility that the information that you're sharing could be altered, or could not altered, but could be tampered or could be hacked in some sort. So always be mindful to classify it first. Am I accepting the risks? Because there's no perfect solution out there. Okay? So now, if you're about to disclose a highly sensitive topic, maybe you shouldn't use any teleconferencing at all. Maybe just call them using your phone. It's another discussion when you use your analog line, right? But maybe you could just use your analog line, or just transmit it via email. Just go to the conference call, say hello to everyone, provide basic information, and just tell them that I'm about to send you the important file that I'm about to share. Then once you have it, keep it there. Don't broadcast it here. All right, you got it. That's it. Maybe do it like that, right? So, again, I'm sorry if I haven't able to answer that. I don't have that direct answer for that question. But basically, I'd rather have it prevented rather than be in a situation wherein you're already detecting an attack or an intrusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to health, right, they say prevention is better than cure. That's why you have to practice proper hygiene so that you don't, get the virus. And it's the same way when you're doing a virtual meeting, that's why you have to practice cyber hygiene because it's a preventive measure. They say that I've read in one report that it takes about 200 days for a big organization to even identify that the system has been hacked. So how much more like for us, like for smaller organizations who doesn't even have the right system for that. So again, at your level, do your very best to protect your data. So to you, Vlada, anything to add to this very interesting discussion?
I must confess that I forgot the first question, so remind me, but I'll do the same way as I did from third to second, and then you can remind me the first. What can we do? And that's an example that I had recently. A friend of mine in one of the companies calling me, knowing that I do what I do, saying we had a ransomware attack. They locked all of our data. What should we do? And I said, did you back up? Do you have a backup? She said, no, you can't do anything. So the first thing is really prevention, as Ray mentioned, but it happens sometimes, and it is too late. I mean, the truth is that in most cases, data is like water. When it's out, it's out. You can't put it together anymore. So you have to accept the risk. But if it happens, certainly you should. If there is sort of a high-tech crime police around, you should report. Usually they can't help you much. But at least they have a better statistics. They know what is happening. Sometimes they can actually prosecute someone. Sometimes it's a topic in itself, the international cooperation. Then most countries have national computer emergency response teams called CERTs or CSERTs, and they are usually there to help. And I think really many countries have it. I know in Asia as well, there are a lot of countries around. They are those who should be helping you in case, firstly issuing the alerts to as early warnings, but then also if it happens, then they can usually help you with some international cooperation, a little bit of forensics, maybe trying to find a solution for you to get your data back and so on. So these are at least two things that you can hope to do if the incident happens, but try not to have it. And then back to the second question, can the data leak from Zoom meetings or any sort of meeting? So firstly, certainly our chats and recordings could leak. That's why encryption is important, both from my end to your end and on the server. So make sure that you have a platform, if it's really sensitive data, that you have a platform like Cisco, which actually encrypts on the servers as well. Zoom is announcing to do that soon as well. But also our own data can leak if someone shares a link or a file in Zoom which is corrupted, which is infected, and you click it. And that's why you have to limit the possibilities of sharing links and files in the applications and so on to prevent from you being hacked during the meeting. It's harder, but that can happen. And I can't remember the first one, but if you want, you can raise it again. Thanks, Trish.
Anyway, you've already answered the first question, which is how to minimize risk when using Zoom and teleconferencing platform. Okay, now that we are about to come to close, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. Just for our participants to have this key takeaway before they leave our very interesting meeting, please maybe in a tweet form of message, Ray and Vlada. I've learned this from Vlada actually this term. Just give us a summary or probably like one lesson that you would like to impart before our participants again go back and to this to their usual things in this new normal. Ray, please begin.
Yeah, I'll be glad to accept, of course, emails or meetings or chats after this meeting, and I'll try to answer them. Maybe forward it to you, Trish. Again, this discussion is not to scare people not to use the technologies that we have out there. Go ahead and use them. Okay, always find the sweet spot or balance between security and ease of use. Okay, you cannot compromise the two. You could have super hardened security that no one could log in anymore because you have a very huge encrypted unreadable password that you set. No, you cannot do that. But just find the sweet spot between the two, between security and ease of use, and operate on that sweet spot. Okay, there's no, if it's the same risk, it's the same physical risk that we take every time we go outside. Every time we go outside, we cross the street, we have the risk of having, an accident. And it's a risk that we take. Same thing with our virtual activities. On every street, every websites rather that we access, we take the risks. On every platform that we use, we take the risk. It's a matter of knowing and classifying your data and the amount of secrecy that you're about to disclose on whatever platform that you use. But still, go ahead and use them, study them, spend some time knowing the background, and yeah, enjoy your online activity. But just ensure that proper hygiene is implemented. You have some experts or IT personnel or security department that you could reach out to for questions, that you could report issues and malicious activities, you could report them. And that's it. Just repeat the cycle. And we improve along the way. Other than that, yeah, I'm okay, and I'll be glad to handle whatever offline questions that you'll be sending me. Thank you, Trish, for really having me tonight.
Thank you. We're also very glad that you've taken the time to join us. Vlada, please go ahead.
Trisha, I am the one who usually asked for the tweet at the closing, and this is the first time someone asked me, and it's really tricky to do it. So that's how I see how it works. But I would probably build up with two things. One is very simple: don't be stupid. That's literally a rule of thumb. Don't be stupid. We have so many smart devices, smart connected cities, whatever, but we are missing smart people. Not in the sense that we are not smart, but we are not using the brain. So this is something that we have to think about. We have to learn the basic habits, digital hygiene, and so on. And Ray, I think, emphasized it well. We have to use some time for that. So you have to spend time to learn, to be smart, to think about it. You have to spend some time. But that's normal. I mean, and other than that, when you do it, enjoy the cyberspace. I absolutely agree. And thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Yes, enjoy the cyberspace. I mean, this is where we are heading. This is the future. I mean, this new normal, right? So don't allow yourself to be left behind, just because you're scared. Okay, we're good. Thank you everyone for being with us today or tonight here in Singapore. We will be sharing with you the recording of this webinar. And if you have additional questions, Ray already offered that you can just continue with the chat after this. And we will be sharing with you some documents also from Diplo Foundation that we think you will find very useful. We will be having another webinar in June, so stay tuned. Let us know if you're still interested. Again, thank you so much I think this one has been a really productive one. We've learned a lot, and I hope that you guys have learned as much as I did. So thank you, and yeah, good evening. Goodbye, everyone.